Good afternoon, good morning, wherever people are. It's a real pleasure for you to join us. I'm lucky enough, Mark Malloch-Brown, to be moderating an extraordinary panel of Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF, known very well to all of us. But she's joined by Melinda Gates, also very well known to all of us, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of Sima Bahous, who leads UN Women, an organization critical to today's discussion, and Minister Zainab Ahmed of Nigeria, who is dramatically trying to move forward this gender agenda in that country. So let me dive straight in and just say that gender sometimes is treated as an important box to be ticked in the development of economic policies. But of course, it's much more than that. Women are often the first victims of austerity policies, of the kind of dislocations that the world is facing at the moment. But if they are the first victims, they are also the key to stability and growth and turning that crisis situation into opportunity, because they're in so many economies the most underemployed asset, either active but in the informal sector, or if in the formal sector, less well rewarded than their male counterparts. So the great, if you like, sleeping asset whose full employment and engagement can transform societies. So as victims on the one hand, but as agents of growth on the other, I think all of us in institutions like those represented today struggle to both protect women, but also engage them in that second part of the proposition as I've made it. So if I could begin, Kristalina, with you. You and Christine Lagarde before you have been championing gender policies for quite a while now, and your staff has worked on macro gender issues. And now you have your first IMF strategy on mainstreaming gender. Now, what do you expect to achieve by this? And I've just set up a serious yardstick for you that too often the IMF policies have hit women disproportionately hard and have failed perhaps in the growth dimension and recovery and stability dimension of those policies to empower women to the full extent that might achieve a better growth outcome for the country concerned. Kristalina.
Thank you, Mark, and many thanks to my fellow panelists. This is an incredible group of women you have, Mark, today, and the audience can enjoy listening to. So you're absolutely right. We have to think about inclusion of women, gender equality, from the perspective of what the fund is all about. The fund is about macroeconomic and financial stability, growth and employment. It is about improving the lives of people around the world. And there is simply no way an economy can prosper and reach its full potential if it doesn't tap into all its people, men and women. I owe a debt of gratitude to Christine Lagarde, because Christine made this point loud and clear during her term, and I took it from her to then translate this conviction into a very clear pathway for the IMF to be a force for good. And when we worked on our gender strategy, we asked ourselves, what is it that we can do and who we can do it with? What we can do is to bring women front and center in macro policy discussions. Look at budget from the prism of women, put a gender lens on it. And when we design programs, make sure that they are inclusive and they enhance the opportunities for women and through that for economies. I'm very glad that Zainab is on this call, because our work with Nigeria is very illustrative of what this strategy is all about. We have done a lot of analytics on the role of women in the economy and how this role can be enhanced, how we can go for better property rights for women, all the way to having more attention to women in our, in the Ministry of Finance work. And then we took that into capacity development, training staff to do gender-based budgeting. And then we took it further to expanding partnerships in Nigeria with others that are very significant for making all this work. And that takes me to the second part. Who do we work with? Obviously, UN Women. We work very closely with the Gates Foundation. Melinda, I'm very grateful to you for your wealth of expertise that you're willing to share with us. And we work with development partners in countries because we don't have all the expertise. What we have is this very highly specialized economic analysis and policy expertise. And when we bring all of us together, that makes a huge difference. And then countries do better, communities do better, families do better.
Kristalina, thank you. Melinda, if I may turn to you. I mean, you, ever since you came on the scene as co-chair of the foundation, have been championing the issue of gender. But, you know, typical of the foundation and of you, you've really invested in a sort of evidence-based approach to this. You had a 2-year investigation exploring how to increase women's economic empowerment, just as you were setting up your gender equality strategy. And so it'd be great for us to hear how those findings are informing your work and, of course, where they intersect with what Kristalina and the IMF are doing.
Well, thank you for that question, Lord Malloch-Brown. And thank you, Kristalina, for having all of us for this important discussion on this panel. The truth is, I didn't come to the gender work until almost a decade after we'd started the foundation. We were already working in places such as health, trying to improve people's health, and then trying to improve people's livelihoods so they could lift themselves out of poverty. But it wasn't until I came face to face with realizing what was truly going on for women around the world that I said, we as investors, we want to use the money, the resources that are in our hands that have come from Microsoft and from Warren Buffett's assets. We want to use them to the best of our ability to make sure we're making huge impact for the world. And it became clear that when we were doing general programming as a foundation, whether we were looking at agriculture, assuming that a new drought-resistant seed or pest-resistant seed got out to all farmers, women and men equally, it turned out we realized that having that general assumption was completely false. That if we wanted to reach all farmers, we needed to do special programming to reach women. And in fact, to not leave money on the table, if we're going to make an investment, we have to look at the women's piece of work and realize, do special programming there to bring them into the economy, because they do so much unpaid and informal work around the world. And the more we started to look at this, the more we realized we needed to collect data about women's lives, data about women's work, and then figure out, how do we bring them into the economy? There are 3 billion women around the world. And if we can make sure they can both do what they want to do and care for their families and participate in the labor force, it's a double bottom line. We are going to take the investments that we have as a foundation and reach so many more people. And by doing so, those women with money in their hands will invest in everybody else around them. I've seen it all over the world. We can talk about India in a minute. I've just come from there. I was there just 4 days ago. But why have they weathered the economic shocks of COVID so well, it's because they invested in their women and they're bringing them into the economy.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Sima, if I could turn to you next. And UN Women has done tremendous work in identifying the disproportionate impact of these crises we're going through at the moment, both the economic debt crisis, but also food, energy, climate, humanitarian. You've done a lot to identify the impact on women and girls, and you've been working with national governments to try and help them support these challenges. What are the main lessons you're drawing, especially for designing and the sort of implanting of macroeconomic and financial policies for governments as they move forward?
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mark, for the question. And let me first thank you, Kristalina, for bringing us together. And I'm also honored to join you, Kristalina, Melinda, and Minister Ahmed to discuss how gender equality is essential, actually, for the economy, for crisis recovery, and for achieving a sustainable and resilient future for all of us. I think, if I may say, as we have heard and we know, the convergence of COVID-19, climate change, the geopolitical conflicts threatens gender equality across the globe. No country is immune and no woman is immune from these threats. Women and girls, we know, pay the highest price in any conflict. And our latest analysis is showing us that we are off track on all the SDGs, but we are mostly off track on SDG 5. And our analysis is also showing us that it will take us nearly 300 years, 286 specifically. If we continue at this pace, it will take us this amount of time to close the gender gap and to achieve SDG 5. And I don't think any one of us has the time to wait that long, nor would we like to wait that long. So the evidence, therefore, is clear, Mark. Women are facing more intense impacts, including higher rates of poverty, greater risks of food insecurity, skyrocketing rates of violence, and a global pushback on their rights, as we all know. During the COVID-19 pandemic, also levels of gender-based violence skyrocketed the world over, from France to Uganda and more. Women also are the first to rise in the morning, and they are the last to eat. And nearly 1 in 3 women is experiencing today moderate to severe food insecurity, and the gender gap is widening. And globally, nearly 1 in 3 women is experiencing moderate or severe food insecurity, with the gender gap increasing from 2 to 4%. 60% of the world's undernourished people live in conflict affected areas. Most of them are women and children. So, what I want to say also that in 2020 alone, women globally lost more than 64 million jobs, which equals 5% of the total jobs held by women. They account for only 47% of the global workforce. Therefore, losing 5% of that is uh, quite something. In addition, women took on unprecedented levels of additional care work, as was mentioned. As an example, for example, in Asia and the Pacific, one study revealed to us that 44% of women in STEM occupations did not have any flexible working arrangements. In an already gender imbalanced field, it meant that more and more women than men left their jobs during the pandemic. So even when governments also recognize this and work to stem the tide of these crises, efforts continue to fall short. Our analysis during COVID showed us that fiscal measures directly aimed at strengthening women's economic security or supporting unpaid care accounted for only 20% of over 3,000 measures globally. So, based on such evidence and the knowledge we have of what works, we have identified 3 areas for urgent action. We must ensure women's access to decent work, we must invest in the care economy, and we must continue to amplify women's leadership. And allow me to just focus on two of these three. One is women's access to decent work. Social protection and food security must be ensured. We need universal, gender responsive social protection systems as a buffer against economic and environmental shocks so we can continue and women can continue to access work and ensure their economic activity. Also, number two is public investments in the care economy are central to economic recovery. Affordable, quality care services are not only critical to support women's participation in the labor force, but can also drive a job rich recovery. So, to finance these areas of urgent action, we need macroeconomic policies, including debt relief, progressive taxes, and especially for low income countries, global cooperation to ensure that resources flow where they are needed most and where they can make the biggest difference. At the same time, governments need to use fiscal policy, both tax and expenditure, to safeguard spending for women. This means they need to raise resources in progressive ways and direct spending to women, especially poor women, so that we do not leave anyone behind. This requires a systematic analysis of the gender implications of countries' tax systems and budgets, as was mentioned by Kristalina as well. So, targeting public spending will have a triple dividend of increasing women's labor force participation, enhancing human capabilities, and creating decent jobs, including in the care economy and also in the blue and the green transitions. I would stop here, I guess. I have some examples, Lord Mark, but I don't know if I have time to continue to say them, but maybe I will share them a bit later.
Exactly.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, we'll hold them and share them either in the second round of questions or we'll find other ways to make sure they're not lost because you gave us a wealth of important figures and statistics there that I hope people caught, and thank you for that. Let's now turn to Minister Ahmed. If I might say so, you're in a distinguished tradition of women finance ministers in Nigeria, and there has been, remarkable work to bravely really make sure women are mainstreamed into the budgeting process in the country. And I know you've used a gender responsive budgeting model in preparing the 2022 budget. And for those of us who know your country, we just know that there is this great sort of underemployed sector of women and children, that the great talent of that sector is not fully emancipated and empowered in the economic life of the country. And so, it'd be great to hear what you think of the future policies you hope to see adopted and to build on your achievements to make sure that Nigerian women and girls are brought into the economic and frankly social mainstream of the country. And you're obviously a real leader in doing that. So, Minister, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Malloch-Brown. And let me also thank Kristalina for inviting me and for convening me amongst very outstanding ladies. Thank you very much, Kristalina. We have, for quite a long time, realized that the economic and social empowerment of us is key to achieving the SDGs and reducing inequality as well as improving participation of women in the labor force and overall economic activities is not only the right thing to do, but that it is key to improving economic outcomes. So it is an investment that we're looking at. Our decision to adopt gender responsible budgeting is therefore against this background. So we're lucky that the IMF also was looking at supporting gender budgeting. And we got this support that helped us to create a framework that enabled us start providing in our 2022 budget clear guidance to government agencies on gender responsive budgeting. But prior to the gender responsive budgeting, we had several programs in country that were designed to empower women and girls. And some of these programs include a National Women Endowment Fund, which is a fund that provides small, soft loans to rural women and to also enhance financial inclusion. We have the Nigeria for Women project, which was also providing livelihood improvement packages to and grants, trainings to women, as also and also access to market for their products. We have the gender policy in agriculture, which was adopted to reduce the vulnerability that women face in the whole of the agricultural value chain. And then we had the framework to combat terrorism and violence with specific focus on targeting women and how women can be protected against terrorism and violence. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we developed a national economic sustainability plan, costed at 5.9 billion US dollars, but the plan was consciously designed for targeted interventions to minimize economic contractions, prevent business collapse, to protect the most vulnerable. So this plan was designed to have every cluster of the economic sustainability plan have at least 50% women beneficiaries. And I'm glad UN Women is here. So at the end of the day, the economic sustainability plan did help us to exit recession within just one quarter. But the measurements that the UN Women has done shows that the targets that we have set in meeting the beneficiaries' proportion of women to men were actually met. And that is why the ESP actually succeeded, because it was clear that the most impacted population were actually women that were most affected. Also, our national social safety net programs, we have 5 clusters, but the conditional cash transfer program of that plan has 95% women beneficiaries. Our realization was, if you wanted to bring up a family that is really low in the society, you need to put money in the hands of the women who are the caregivers of the family. And we have seen the lives of these small families with these small monthly grants that we give them turn around because of this cash transfers. Some families that we gave that had men as leaders, unfortunately, didn't turn out so well, but the women really met the conditions because it was conditional. We wanted to make sure that their children go to school. We wanted to make sure that women that are pregnant go and receive maternity care, and their children are taken to the hospitals when they're sick. So the women ensured that was happen, and they continue to make the grants. We also started producing annual finance bills. The first bill we produced, incidentally, was in January 2020, before the outbreak of the COVID. But we had a relief package in it that was targeted at small, medium enterprises, and more than 50% of MSMEs in Nigeria are women. What we did was to relieve the smallest businesses from paying taxes, and also reduce the tax rates from 30% to 20% for medium businesses. That helped the businesses of those women to stay alive during the COVID period, to be sustained, and then we had more grants that we gave them through the ESP to make sure that they are able to continue to run their businesses. In our current medium national development plan, which we are implementing, we mainstream women empowerment in every sector of the economy that the plan covered. So we're always asking the question, what is the design of your agency, and how will it affect women? How are you looking out for women benefiting? So for us, to answer your question, moderator, engaging the stakeholders wasn't a difficult task, and people were just realized, but this is what has been missing for a long time. And we had a lot of people very quickly embrace the need to make sure that in every program that they design, they're asking, how will it benefit women? How will it benefit our youth? So we were lucky that it was very, very well received. And so far it's going on very well. And at the end of 2022, early 2023, we'll be measuring the outcome of the performance of our gender responsive budgeting in the 2022 budget, because that was the first year that we actually mainstreamed gender responsive budgeting in the national budgeting process.
Thank you very much, Minister. And just to remind people, if you do have questions, please send them in to IMFLive at imf.org. We're now quickly going to turn to the second round of questions, which are really about partnerships and collaboration. You've heard from 4 different kinds of institutions in this first round. And now the key thing, I think, is to understand how by combining you get a multiple power in terms of moving this gender agenda forward. And I'm going to start with Melinda, if I may, who's got to leave us a little earlier than our other guests. So I'm going to go to her first. And, the Gates Foundation has really, in a sense, brokered the idea of partnerships with, those with international organizations, women's movements, public-private partnerships. And it'd just be good to hear how you think all those enablers are sort of moving the agenda forward, having that sort of multiplier effect. Melinda.
Thank you. I think, first of all, there is absolutely nothing that we do as a foundation that isn't in partnership with others. It's the only way to get things to move forward on behalf of the world, and particularly in women. So let me give a couple of very specific economic examples of how to pull women into the economy. India. We have been working with India now for over 20 years. When the pandemic broke out, luckily, they had already done 2 things. In an open sourced way, we had been working with them in their regulatory environment to start laying the digital rails down. They had a national ID system, and they already had digital bank accounts en masse out in the population. What happened during COVID was, of course, many people got pushed out of the workforce and were at home. What they knew was to make good social protection payments, they should run those through the digital rails into the digital bank accounts and get them in the hands of women. Because the prime minister and the government knew that if a woman had that social protection payment, the way she spent it was for her family and her household. Now, what is happening in India is because of these digital rails, where the prices are basically zero to put money in and out of the system, literally millions of people are using them, hundreds of million, and they are finally reaching the last mile. They're actually reaching poor women with digital bank accounts, and they're reaching the middle class and high income. That is good for taxation policy. That is good for social protection. That is good for pulling people into the economy. That is good for growing your economy. So these digital rails, which I know Kristalina will talk about more, are happening all over the world. Kenya, Tanzania, Philippines, pick your country. But doing them with the right way that are open source so that there's competition and the prices are low, so you include everybody, that is phenomenally important. India also did, because of the fintech organization, which is in deep partnership with other, they knew who had which bank accounts, men versus women. Second, very quick example, you want to pull women into the economy? Make sure women run businesses. Make sure they have access to venture capital. In Senegal, women run 31% of the businesses in Senegal. They only have access, 3.5% of them have access to capital. And yet, I met this summer 2 amazing entrepreneurs. They figured out, 2 women, how to go collect tires off the streets in Dakar, where they're breeding grounds for mosquitoes, grind them up and sell them to cement factories. They have so much demand for their business, they can't keep up with their supply. So they finally, luckily, got access to venture capital through a woman-led organization that puts capital in the hands of women. Third last example, and the Honorable Minister from Nigeria talked about this. And again, we've done this in partnership with many different countries and organizations. If you get in the hands of women a digital bank account, and she's part of a self-help group sometimes, but you get into her hands access to eggs and to chickens, what does she do? It's protein for her family, the eggs. She sells them on the market and has money. She can weather economic shocks, and she saves money. And when you ask her, what is she saving the money for? She will often tell you, either for the health of her children for an economic shock, or to send her kids to school. That's what I mean about getting money into the hands of women. When you get it into their hands, they invest in everyone else. And that is when an economy grows and prospers. And it has to be done in partnership with many, many, many institutions and organizations on the ground in these places where people live. And that's what we believe in.
Thank you so much, and thank you for a wonderful pair of contributions that you've made, Melinda, and I know we'll lose you fairly shortly, but let me just move quickly on to Minister Ahmed, because in a sense, you know, the real test of partnerships by international organizations or foundations is the impact at the country level on your constituents, the women, girls, men and boys that you seek to serve. Are these partnerships helping you deliver for them? And so it'd be great to get your evaluation of, you know, how best international organizations and foundations can support you in your work.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're lucky, at least in Nigeria, we have great support from the IMF, from the World Bank, UN Women, and several other organizations, but also a lot of support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And a lot of the support that we have is actually a coordinated one. So it's not one organization coming to speak to you on one program and then you have another one. But what I want to add to that is to say that in all of this support, like we've been asking for recently, and it's beginning to happen, is for the international partners to step back and put the country in the front so that the program is owned by implementers of the program, and that way it can be sustained. Otherwise, we've seen programs where the public servants say that's a donor program, so it's like they don't own it. So there's a need for the staff of these institutions to be schooled in being able to step back and allow the government officials to actually own the program and implement it, and then they provide support.
Thank you so much on that. So, Sima, if I could just turn to you, and you know, UN Women collaborates with an awful lot of different partners to advance gender equality, and just if you would give us a sense of some of the more successful partnerships and the results you've achieved.
Thank you, Lord Mark, again. And I must say, to start with, as you have highlighted, progress on gender equality requires that we all come together in a coordinated manner and in a common objective towards gender equality. Also, inclusive and trust-based partnerships at the core of what we do with member states, with within the UN, with multilateral organizations, with multilateral partners, and with civil society. We have also, as UN Women, a tremendous privilege as a UN entity in that we have convening power and an opportunity to give voice and platform to those furthest left behind. And as a priority for me, it is also to do more of that, especially for young women, by amplifying their voices, bringing in different perspectives and partners to go further together on the issues of gender equality. And this we do almost every day here in the work that we do. The Commission on the Status of Women, which in its 67th session next year will consider innovation and technology as its priority theme, is another space where we see the power of partnerships, where civil society, academia, member states converge to discuss solutions to our global challenges. Next year, the opportunity will be to review how we can better bridge the technology gap, how to utilize innovation, including climate smart agriculture technologies, to better advance gender equality and create a more flourishing and sustainable future, and also to build on last year's, which was on climate crisis and women and gender equality and women empowerment. I saw, for example, in Tanzania, if I can bring an example from Tanzania, where UN Women is working with the UN family there and national authorities in developing climate smart agriculture approaches. yielding high crop results, less environmental impact is important. So almost all the women I met there noted, as Melinda just highlighted also, that they spend their income on the education of their children and on their households. And in so doing, they are making a direct investment in a more sustainable future. Also in Senegal, through our care needs assessment with cooperatives of women farmers, women identified time saving infrastructure, water, transport, energy, and better social protection as essential to their well being. UN Women is now working with the Senegalese government to strengthen their access to health insurance, which will require economic and social policy action. Also, as an example of our support to countries to advance gender responsive macroeconomic policies, together with ILO, we are supporting 20 countries across all regions, including Nigeria, Argentina, Nepal, my own country, Jordan, to analyze fiscal stimulus measures, identify gender gaps, and address these via economic policies as part of recovery efforts. Colleagues, we are also very proud of Generation Equality that has brought together partnerships, organizations from every part of society to advocate for change and for bold action to address decades of underinvestment in gender equality. We now have over 2,500 multi stakeholder policy, program, and financial commitments. And we have generated an aggregate of 40 billion for climate action, for economic justice, for combating violence against women, and promoting technology innovation. The action coalitions of generation equality also across sectors are working towards gaining traction on many of these issues. For example, the Global Alliance for Care, convened by the government of Mexico and UN Women, has grown to 78 members and has catalyzed multiple activities to drive investments in the care economy. We have the Alliance for Feminist Movements, important alliance, formally launched at the UNGA 77. It has accelerated its efforts to build resources and also political support for women and women movements. We have MasterCard and Microsoft, who have launched the Tosca Conectadas project in Latin America and the Caribbean to advance women's roles in science and technology. It will connect more than 3.8 million women in the region, aiming at post pandemic economic recovery and providing access to technologies. And here I must thank very much the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Melinda's personal commitment for all this generation equality partnerships that we are doing with you. Melinda, thank you so much. The foundations remain one of our strongest partners on generation equality and a core member of the Generation Equality Leadership Group. I also want to recognize our important collaboration with the International Monetary Fund. Your new gender equality strategy, Kristalina, encourages us all to coordinate efforts drawing on our complementary expertise and respective mandates. UN Women and IMF are working closely on gender responsive budgeting. In the Americas, for example, our joint capacity development on gender responsive budgeting has been highly appreciated by the ministers of finance and sectoral ministries. So we must continue to enhance these efforts by providing joint analysis and technical support to governments. And also, I must end by saying that advancing gender equality, as you all know, promotes stability by enhancing economic resilience and reducing disparities of income and other social disparities. I thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sima, very much indeed. So, Kristalina, you've made collaboration a main panel of the IMF gender strategy. And how does the IMF plan to sort of engage with all its 190 member countries and external partners, multilateral and bilateral, to kind of achieve those gender dividends for an organization which has kept its mandate quite tight and narrow in the past? This seems to be a cultural revolution, not just embracing gender, but embracing partnerships of this kind as well.
We do operate within our mandate, but we recognize the world has changed and we need to enhance our understanding of our mandate so we can be implementing it effectively for the benefit of our members. What we do to make us effective is threefold. First, we are very clear about building the strategy step by step with internal clear actions and engagements with members as well as with partner organizations. What it means internally, Mark, is that we have created a small team and institutional infrastructure across the fund that allows us to translate the aspiration of the strategy into very concrete program and policies engagements. And this small team, among other tasks, has the responsibility to identify on a country-by-country basis who our partners are, and then to help our country teams so they can put this gender lens on their work effectively. Secondly, we identify issues where we can bring value. And among those, I would point to three. Data. Gender disaggregated data is absolutely critical. We have to make the invisible visible. Who are the people we support? Where are the women? How can we reach out to them? Is our budget work actually making a difference for women? Financial inclusion. This is an area where we have done quite a lot of work. Melinda mentioned it in her intervention, where we identify how women can become part of the banking system through digital accounts, but also how they can be part of the, broadly, of the economy. And three gaps. And I want to give just an illustration how huge these gaps are. Women in different countries produce somewhere between 50 and 80% of the food we eat. But women own only 10% of the land. How could that be sustained and still guarantee that we are making progress in the economy if women are held back in decision making because they don't have access to ownership of land, and yet they are those who produce the food? Another example, Melinda mentioned it, this is really, really very important, and I want to echo what she said, is access to finance, to capital. Data shows, and Zainab can correct me if I'm wrong, but data shows that in Africa, women are better entrepreneurs than men. In other words, women-owned businesses do better than men-owned businesses. But women have 6 times less access to finance. How could that be corrected? In both cases, what can legislation do? How we can show the economic value of legislative change, and then how that can be taken into the functioning of the economy effectively. So we, in all these areas, we know what we can do, and we know where we need the help of others. And our partnerships are based on not only on a broader aspirational objective, let's work together to integrate women in the economy, but they're based on what specifically we can do. I cannot overstate the importance of working with our members. Zainab said something that is worth repeating: ownership. If a program is perceived to be dropped from outside upon the country, the likelihood of success goes down dramatically. But if it is a program that the country itself embraces, and what we do as partners is to provide more analytics, provide more experience from other places, then that program is going to be really successful. And to finish where you started, Mark, yes, the fund is evolving towards an institution that is recognizing that in a fast-changing world, we can only be successful if we work together, and that what we know, what we can do, would go so much farther if it is part of this collective action for a more sustainable, more inclusive world.
Thank you, Kristalina. As always, an inspirational way of finishing that answer. Look, if I turn back to the minister as we now move into questions, and there's curiosity, I think, from many of us about how the political sustainability of the gains on gender in Nigeria. You've got elections ahead of you, and I just wondered, how sure you are and certain you are that the policies you've put in place will survive a change of government, and that indeed projects the Ministry of Finance has particularly promoted, the Nigeria for Women project, for example, that these will be protected and indeed enhanced and pursued whoever is the next president of the country. Minister.
Well, thank you very much. You were breaking up a bit. I hope you can hear me. That's why I earlier on said it's important that we must make sure that there are government officials that are owning and running these programs. That is what would enhance the program's sustainability. And also by putting, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I said that is why it's important that we must make sure that there are government officials that are running and owning the programs. That is what will ensure its sustainability, because governments come and go, ministers also come and go. But when the step we took of mainstreaming gender into the budgeting process is also a sustainable one, because we put it in a core circular, and now each ministry, department, and agency has now gotten used to the practice of questioning every program they plan. And we gave them an incentive to make sure that in selecting the programs, we're consciously selecting and including programs that actually have gender positive dimensions. We also developed the IMFLive, which is the Integrated National Financing Framework. That also was underpinned by a medium-term sector strategy, as well as a medium-term expenditure framework. That was developed collectively by several agencies of government. That ensures that in every annual circle of budgets, plans, that this gender responsive budgeting and gender lens expenditure will be a thing that will continue. So yes, there are some risks, but we can mitigate those risks by making sure that government officials are part of the processes, from planning to implementation to monitoring of the programs and projects.
Great. Thank you very much, Minister. Let me ask, if I may, Kristalina, about the private sector. We've had a question about, how the specific role of public-private partnerships and, how they can better empower women. And we all know the private sector is such a dominant part of the global economy and national economies that it's hard to move these needles without their full engagement. So do you look at them as a wholehearted partner on this agenda?
Yes, we do. And we do a lot of work to identify the value of gender equality and inclusion for companies. We have done research also in partnerships with others to show how having more women on the boards of companies impacts positively their performance. We looked at the role of women entrepreneurs. We looked at what is necessary, what policy changes are necessary to enhance the field of female participation. And when we go into discussions in countries, we always reach out, of course, to the authorities, our partners, and we reach out to the private sector. And we, in particular, reach out to women-led enterprises to be part of that discussion. I personally, always when I visit the country, I would have at least one round of meetings with women leaders from the public sector, from the private sector. And the objective is to understand what makes it more vibrant, what makes it more likely that economies would be open for a bigger role for women. And I learned from these interactions a lot. Most recently, I was in Saudi Arabia. I met, as I always do, with the round table of women from the public and the private sector. And I want to share with you two observations of that. The first one is what an excitement there was in the room. Saudi Arabia is making huge progress on gender equality after being a lagger for a long, long time. And you can feel it in the room. They have reached and exceeded their 2030 target for female participation in the labor force. And that excitement, I just want to convey to the audience, means that when women get their rights, they go far and they go fast. And they talked about the successes of female leadership. And the second thing I want to share from that experience is that in our work as an institution, we have a significant responsibility to encourage public institutions to engage with the private sector and to pay attention to what is happening in the private sector. And of course, we have instruments to do that, like our Article 4 consultations. So my wrapping up of this, the answer to this question is that if we are to be looking for the most powerful reservoir for growth in this decade, it is actually increased labor market participation of women and increased participation of women in entrepreneurship. We cranked the numbers. This is what the IMF is good at, and it is astonishing. Countries can get up to 35% increase of their GDP if they are to achieve full and meaningful inclusion of women in the labor force and in the business sector. I rest my case, and but that is why we have to engage with men and women. By the way, men play a huge role when they're open to tap into the talent of women, so we can collectively accelerate the transformation that we have been talking here about. We do not have 289 years to do so.
So if I may, Kristalina, just a quick follow-up supplemental to that, which is, the getting from where we are now to there in less than 289 years. The next critical stage is the recovery. What are your special measures and steps to get women more engaged in the economy during this recovery phase?
We have embraced on a very significant amount of work that translates into policy recommendations to answer this question. First, looking into what is the impact of the COVID crisis on women, on female participation in the labor force, on women in business. And the sad story is that we have gone backwards. So we have the data, and therefore we have to turn this data into actionable recommendations to our members. And there, what we are particularly focused on is how social protection systems operate. Do they reach women? Melinda talked a lot about that. We are actually, I dare say, we are a leading voice on making sure that social protection systems put support in the hands of women. Secondly, we are very engaged on how we can get the prerequisites for female participation in place. And it is very obvious. we need to have childcare, and we need to have the confidence of women that their kids are in good hands to learn. Investment in childcare and early child development is probably the fastest way to get more women back in the labor force of those who left it during the pandemic, and those who have never been in the labor force to join. And then we look into the return on this investment. So we can tell Zainab, you make this investment, you're actually going to get more in tax revenues because of the increase in productivity and performance of the economy.
Great, thank you, Kristalina. And there unfortunately isn't time for more questions. Minister, you should know that there was a YouTube question to you about getting more investment in women-led businesses, particularly in Africa. But I think that was touched on by a number of you. So I think rather than running over, because I know you're all busy, we will draw this to an end. And I just want to say, you know, what a privilege it is for me to be lucky enough to chair 4 such remarkable women leaders. And I think the messages of this session were pretty clear, which is where we began in a way an hour ago, which is that, you know, women tend to be the early victims. And in a period like now, as Kristalina has just said, we're actually going backwards in terms of the standing of women in the global economy. We're going backwards because of these disruptive crises that are hitting us around inflation, energy prices, debt, the rest. And we've got a long road ahead of us still to get out of that crisis. But what we've also heard this afternoon is the route to leaving that crisis, the route indeed to a better, more prosperous, more sustainable world for everybody is to bring women and girls into the economic mainstream, to empower them economically, to make sure they have access to capital to build their businesses, that they are mainstreamed into the formal economy, and that in not just the economic realms, but the political and social as well, that emancipation means that half of humankind enjoys its half of the sun, as Nick Kristof observed in his writing on this. And I think, you know, congratulations to the IMF for both hosting us today, but also for its new gender policy and the mainstreaming of gender, which in itself is a revolutionary expansion of the economic model. Because Kristalina, with the great advantage of closing, I'll take advantage of reminding you, and I don't need to remind you, but austerity and adjustment is no friend of women. And so as you move forward towards more expansionary economic models to embrace climate, to embrace other new dimensions of surveillance, we're thrilled that gender too is going to be one of the issues through which the IMF looks through its lens to get economic models that empower all. So to you, to the Minister, good luck with the great challenges still ahead of you in Nigeria, and to Sima Bahous of UN Women, who is our conscience and champion on all of these issues for men and women alike. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.